I apologize for the delay in the Vinland Saga content, but we are back and better than ever. And this is one of my favorite animes, so I just wanted to give it time to marinate, I guess, or build up a little bit more suspense, because Vinland Saga has these times where the writer will do the due diligence of making things boring in order to forward the plot. Like, it can't always be all action, especially in this type of anime, because it's very realistic. So there has to be times of just rest and, I guess, restoration and rebuilding of plot before, excitement and action can come. And if you very much like the anime, you'll appreciate it regardless. Like, you won't, I think only people that aren't diehard fans will get turned off when there's not any action, because Vinland Saga is actually a very good show, and it's not always about just fighting and violence. So I was right. So I remember in my last Vinland Saga episode, I made a reference thinking that episode 14 should have been called Storm instead of whatever else it was called. I think it was called Freedom, and I was like, this should have been called Storm, because they kept talking about a storm was coming, but then the next episode, so I jumped the gun basically, because the next episode, which is episode 15, was actually called Storm. And this is a completely random thought, but special thanks to the producers of these episodes, because I just feel like the noises and basically the onomatopoeia of Vinland Saga is so rich, and I'm like, how do they find these sounds for the winds crashing and the waves crashing and the wind blowing in the air in someone's ear? It's like, how do you find a noise for that and then put it into an anime? I'm sure it's simplified now, but I just appreciate how real and realistic these sounds may seem at times. I want to emphasize how right I was in saying that Arnheid is a very beautiful character, internally and externally. It could either be that, or just men on the farm don't see women much, and she seems to be the only real young woman that we actually do see. So that might be why she just seduces everyone so easily, and that's how she was actually able to get to see her husband. She seduced one of the guards and just letting her have her way, but it backfires, and we'll see that very soon. So long story short, Gardar is chained up, but he's still very, I want to say, rabid, and he ends up biting the guard's neck, and I think he pulls his whole jugular out of his neck. Vinland Saga is wild for this type of stuff. Like, when I see this type of stuff, I'm like, bravo, jolly good show. But I know some people are just like, dang, that was a bit gruesome. Like, I can only imagine what it was like in the manga. I'm sure it was even worse. I know Arnheid regrets getting herself mixed up all in this mess, but hey, that was her husband and the love was there. So at a point in episode 15, we see that basically Einar and Thorfinn are discussing, and Thorfinn is saying he doesn't even want Arnheid to know that he was a warrior. And I never even nourished the thought of Arnheid and Thorfinn being friends as well, because I always kind of just assumed that they kind of just acquaintances, but I start to realize Thorfinn actually cares what she thinks of him as well. And the thought of him being a warrior, that's really his past, and he wants to put that behind him, and he doesn't want anyone to view him in that way. Very realistic, because sometimes we have things in our past that we're ashamed of, and even if we've changed, we don't want people to find out the past or find out the old us, because they feel like they might view us that way, in a way that we are no longer. Another interesting part in the show is when Thorfinn and Einar brainstorm about how they can stop slavery and war as a whole, and only to realize it's a childish dream, because how could you protect yourselves with no swords? At this point, I'm finally so happy, because Snake is no longer playing games, because Gardar has killed too many of his subordinates, so at this point he's ready for war. He just wants to end it. A round of applause for the character of Einar, because he's just literally noble to a fault. He's ready to help Arnheid and Gardar escape, even if it means putting his own neck on the line. However, I'm not happy for Thorfinn's character, because I expected more of him than to just get into Einar's plan, especially after he made the promise to himself that he's not going to get involved in anything violent, anything like that. But he childishly believes that he can fulfill some of these things without getting his hands dirty, and I don't think that's possible. And then finally, the concept of having no enemies and needing no sword rears its head once again, because old man Sverkel advises Snake that he really should just get rid of his sword and just live a happy life, because it's just a never-ending cycle. And Snake says that if he cannot defeat a man that killed 5 of his subordinates, then he has no right to wield a sword. And Sverkel says, you don't even need a sword, Snake. Sverkel even promises Snake land. He's like, just take my land, I'll sell all my land, and that can compensate you, and you can just live a happy life. But Snake is just not budging one bit, and it's very moving and compelling to see that. Some of these things are very deep rooted, and the violence and the hatred and the anger is very deep rooted. It was a good plan for Einar to act as Gardar and lure away the rest of Snake's men, but we already know that Snake is too smart for all of that. Like literally his code name is Snake, and we'll get into why they have code names later. Actually, I finally figured that out. But bravo, can we get a round of applause for Arnheid, because she literally hid Gardar under the old man's bed, like hiding in plain sight. It's one of the smartest things to do. Who would have thought to look there? Who would have thought he's hiding right under their noses? And then this part in the episode 16 had me laughing, because Snake was like, oh yeah, Gardar was unconscious under the bed, that's why I didn't sense his presence. I was like, bro, you in the wrong anime right now, because when in Vinland Saga could you guys sense presence? Like, what is this? I mean, I understand, like, yeah, I guess in a warrior sense, but bro, you not sensing his presence, you not sensing no one under the bed. Like, I mean, I guess if he is unconscious, yeah, like less movement, but he tried to make it sound like this is DBZ and they can sense power levels and stuff. Like, it was a little funny when he said that. But fast forwarding to the end of the episode, I knew that the Thorfinn and Snake battle was inevitable. Ever since that one time where they kind of had like a little quick standoff, and then Thorfinn, like, it was like a muscle reaction. Thorfinn did some warrior stuff, then he just went back to acting normal. Ever since then, I knew that they were going to battle again. But it's kind of crazy that Thorfinn battled him with no sword at all. I always knew that Thorfinn's promise of non-violence to himself was going to be very difficult to keep. It was very symbolic that right before his fight with him and Snake, that he thinks of Escalade, and Escalade's like, oh, well, things are getting dangerous now, bro. What are you going to do? It shows how pivotal and important Escalade was in Thorfinn's life, and you would think in a time like this he would think of his father Thor's, but he really only knew his father until the very ripe age of, like, so I want to say 6. He didn't know his father that long, so it actually makes a lot more sense for him to think of Escalade, someone that raised him for much longer in his life and his matriculation. In episode 17, we see that Snake is a very skilled fighter, and Thorfinn even says this. Well, they both acknowledge each other, but it's unfair that Thorfinn had no sword. So that for me says that Thorfinn is actually much more skilled than Snake, because Thorfinn's fighting him without a weapon at all. They finally explain the code names, which I was so questioned about in their old video, and they basically say that they were all criminals and they committed some very heinous acts, so now they can't even speak their real names. They have to just use code names such as Snake, Fox, all those names. I want to highlight the cycle of hatred that just can't be stopped. Snake wants revenge for his subordinates. Gardar wants revenge for his old life being stolen. And you just can't believe that things can never get any better if this cycle just seems to be perpetuated. So Snake is finally able to outmaneuver Thorfinn, and he makes it to the wagon where they are trying to transfer Gardar's basically lifeless body. And he stabs Gardar, but the wound is not deep enough. And this proves to be a very dangerous situation for Snake, because Gardar then wakes up, and even though he's basically unconscious, he uses sheer willpower to put him in this death grip rear naked choke that Snake cannot get out of. And even Thorfinn is trying to help get his fingers off, and he just cannot. Like, it's looking bad for Snake. He made a very huge mistake, very huge miscalculation. By the way, before I leave this out, Snake says that he's from Mikkelgard, and I'm sure you guys were wondering what he was talking about, but it's basically one of the greatest cities in Viking history. It's a very big city, so Mikkelgard just means the great city, and that's where Snake is from. So he's basically like not a peasant. Like, we know he's not a peasant. We know he's definitely like higher up there, maybe middle class, or he's not a peasant, not a slave by any means. But moving onward, the second half of this episode is basically more of that Vinland Saga symbolism that we love so much. Basically, Gardar's life flashes before his eyes, the love for his son Hjalti, his wife Arnheid, and the war, slavery, everything that brought him to this point just flashes before his eyes. He's only able to break the rear naked choke on Snake when Arnheid basically beckons out to him, and he hears her voice, and he's able to, like, I guess come back to reality for a little bit. So long story short, they borrow Sverkel's wagon, and they just ride out, and he's like kind of coming back to his senses. I think this whole time that we encountered him, he was kind of not in his right mind. He was just, war had ravaged his mind, so he's just moving like a feral animal. So but as they're riding on the wagon, just riding to nowhere, Arnheid is just allowing him to have his last wishes, his last thoughts. He regrets everything. He regrets his past. He just wants to live comfortably with his family, but he made the wrong decision in trying to go fight a war for iron. Sometimes men, not even men, just mankind, we make poor decisions thinking that it'll help us, but it actually hinders us and makes things worse. Honor and wealth, those are the words that Gardar actually says, and we see that honor and wealth was what he fought for in his life, and he now sees the error in that, because basically what he says is he would never allow Hjalti to become a Viking, but Hjalti's already dead. Like, I think at this point he doesn't even understand that his son is dead, but he does show a softer side of him than we've seen since he's been introduced, and at least he gets to die in the arms of his wife. And I'm hoping as next episode comes about that Ketil will pardon Arnheid, because one, that's his mistress, and you know, Ketil's actually he has a soft heart, so maybe he'll pardon her, but it has been a lot that's been going on. I know Snake is gonna be pissed when he wakes up, but they have much bigger things to worry about. Like, I was very surprised that they're adding in this whole arc about Gardar when Canute is literally on his way. Like, that means Vinland Saga is gonna get even better, guys. We have so much to look forward to. But this was the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Share with a friend, and remember to, as always, find your zen, your final form. I'll definitely see you next time, guys.
Yeah, okay, let's go.